All right, hello everyone. So I'm going to show you guys how to properly set up a 1300K, 4900K, 17, sorry, what, 17, wait, 17, i7, okay, I'm tripping, i7 14700K. Really any CPU that you get from Intel. So we're going to go ahead and open up hardware info so that I can prove I'm not, well, you can't really, well, can you see my undervolt? You might be able to see my undervolt actually. I guess you can't. So unless, let's see. No, you cannot. So what you're going to want to do, okay, these CPUs, if you're not on any sort of extreme cooling, right, like direct die to like a 360 millimeter or 420 millimeter AIO, you're going to generally want to keep stock clocks. You're not the you can't, and I'm going to do some more overclocking, but I don't feel comfortable making a full overclocking guide yet because it's not difficult to do, but you need to know how to properly tune it for it to make sense longevity wise, right? Um, so if you just got the CPU, until I make a good overclocking guide where you won't blow up your chip, I recommend you do this to, you know, make sure that your chip lasts as long as you want it to, right? Like, you pretty much are going to be the one retiring the CPU instead of the CPU retiring itself, right? So, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to keep stock settings, okay? Um, for the 1400K, the CPU runs at 5.7, 4.4 E core, or sorry, 5.7 P core, 4.4 E core. So this is if you just plop a i7 in any motherboard, or sorry, an i9 1400K in any motherboard, and you boot it up, this is what you'll see: 5.7, 4.4. If you see something different, then that's kind of odd. Like I would go into BIOS and I would set everything back to default and then check again. If you still see weird behavior, I would recommend looking up what's going on. Um, but this is, as long as everything's working correctly, this is what you should see. Um, so what you're going to want to do is in your BIOS, if you wanted to, you could add a +1 offset to the P core and a +1 offset to the E core. I would say that is the easiest way to overclock your CPU without going completely bonkers and overboard in terms of power draw. However, I would not go any further than that. And I recommend, if you do that, I recommend switching your highest P cores from 6.0 down to whatever P core ratio you want to apply to all of them. Because odds are those two P cores are not going to be able to hit 6.1 or 6.2, or just the fact that you have two P cores going up, I just think it's kind of stupid, right? I don't recommend those P cores going up to that frequency at all. And, and case in point, the reason why I say that is because if you look at Intel's default tuning behavior, two of those cores are set do have a max ratio offset or max ratio value of 6 gigahertz. However, you almost never see them hit that under Intel's like default configuration. You almost never see those two P cores go to 6 gigahertz. I've seen it like once, right? Hit 6 gigahertz for like a fraction of a second and then go straight back down to 5.7. And the reason being is because Intel also knows that that's stupid. Those P cores hitting 6 gigahertz does absolutely nothing for the chip except for potentially degrade those two cores faster. I'm sorry, but 6 gigahertz is just not. Here, let's look up percent difference from 5700 to 6, or yeah, 6,000. Okay, this would be what? Hello. Okay, let's see. 5700 to 6,000. Let's see. Okay, there's a 5.12% difference. Is that actually going to be a linear difference that you see in games? No. You might see a 2 to 3% improvement for significantly higher voltage and higher. Now, it is only on two P cores, so it's like, you know, with Intel stock settings, those P cores hitting 6 gigahertz for a split second probably won't cause any problems or any instability or really any heat or anything. It's not going to cause an issue. But if you plan on going higher than that, like a +1, it will also set those highest P cores from 6.0 to 6.1. Or if you did +2, it'll do 6.0 to 6.2. So you want to keep that under control. You don't want those cores boosting up that high. For your E cores on a 4900K, you might be able to get 4600, or you probably will be able to get 4600. 4700 is like a maybe. 4800 is probably not going to happen. You would definitely be able to get 4500, but how much does that really raise performance is really the question. Like, is it worth the increased voltage? In my opinion, no. They're just not strong enough, and there's so many of them on even a 14700K, even a 13700K. It's like you got a lot of E cores. Overclocking them doesn't really do much, right? These are mainly for obviously like super multi-threaded tasks would probably benefit because they're all running at a higher frequency. But once again, there's so many of them, it's like the amount of them definitely by far outweighs frequency. But you could set a +1 ratio offset and get like 4500, and then you at least feel like, okay, they're running higher than stock, right? Next thing you're going to want to do, okay, once you get all that in order and you kind of figure out, it's probably better just to run stock anyways, you're going to want to find your SVID behavior. On MSI, it's called CPU light load. And on MSI, you have 24 different options. So looking at that, it can be very overwhelming, but it's really not. For me, the default was 16. That's what, when I opened my BIOS, went into CPU light load, that is what it was. And the higher the number, so 24 is the least amount of VDROOP. Sorry. 24 is the most amount of voltage, right? That's like if you have a bottom, like you need to RMA your CPU. And 1 is the least amount of voltage. 1 is like golden sample chip, like 1 out of 10,000 chips made, right? So you're going to want to figure out what your best SVID behavior is, right? Some motherboards only have Intel failsafe, worst case scenario, typical case scenario or whatever, and best case scenario. For me, when I was on my ASUS boards, best case scenario did not work. I had to stick to typical case scenario, but that's because best case scenario dropped voltage by a lot, like significantly. So yeah, to me that just made no sense. It went from typical case, which was like 0.5 volts, like higher on the offset or whatever. So my cores would be trying to hit 5.5, 5.6 at like 1.25 volts. That's not going to work, right? So yeah, that's what, just stick to typical case if you're on like ASUS or whatever. I don't think ASUS has any other options. I don't really know why MSI has 24 different options. I think they wanted you to be able to have more fine tuning over that setting, right? Because having so many options, it's like if your CPU is slightly worse than somebody else's CPU, you might need light load level 9, whereas they might be fine on 7 or 8 or 7, right? So, which is like fine, right? And you're lowering voltage, meaning that you are going to, make any sort of degradation slow. Now, even if you just left everything alone, these newer BIOS updates are perfectly capable of keeping your CPU running for a very long time without having to, worry about degradation. So even if you hypothetically did none of this, you're probably fine anyways. But regardless, you still want lower voltage with lower temperatures. So that's what we're doing here. And then what you're probably going to want to do, right, is set a load line calibration. On MSI, there's 8765431, and I don't know if there's a 0, but there might be a 0. I'm running load line at 6, right? That is just the amount of VDROOP that your motherboard allows when your CPU is under a very intensive load. Under load, your CPU with the most VDROOP might drop to like 1.15. Might be unstable, right? whereas load line 7 might only drop to 1.17. Load line level 6 might only drop to 1.2, right? So in my opinion, load line 6 is the best balance between V-droop and stability, like the amount of V-droop you want and stability. For some of you, if you have, a better CPU, like really good silicon quality, you might be able to get away with level 7, no problem. Shoot, if you have a really good CPU, you might even be able to get away with, no load line, um, fucking around with, what I'm saying? You might just be able to get with default load line, which is the most amount of V-droop, right? Now, last thing you want to do, right? This is really where you're going to get temps down and you're going to be able to control voltage pretty significantly. So you're going to want to select adaptive. You're going to want to go to like where the CPU voltage category is, right? You're going to see a couple of different options. You should see CPU like mode or something like that. You click on that. You should have adaptive offset, override, all those. What you're going to want to select is adaptive plus offset, right? That just allows the motherboard to change voltage, like be adaptive with the voltage while also setting an offset, which in my opinion is going to make your chances of stability higher because if the CPU needs more voltage, it is allowed to get more voltage. However, you're also setting a negative offset, meaning that on average, the CPU is going to use less voltage. Now, I don't recommend using a fixed voltage like an override voltage. That means that at 5.7 gigahertz, let's say you did 5.7 at 1.35 volts, that 1.35 volts is going to stay 100% of the time. You're not going to really, well, you'll get some V droop, but you're not going to get enough to where it's like safe daily, right? Especially if you're really running your CPU hard, like, and doing stress tests or anything like that. If you're doing, if you're in a memory overclocking, doing a memory stress test, you really don't want your CPU voltage high. And it's really unnecessary. So what you're going to want to do is do adaptive plus offset, set a negative value, and you're going to want to type in 0.5, right? Click OK, enter, boot into your OS, run some Cinebench, just kind of like, open some tabs, just do some general stuff that might show. If I'm being honest with you, a good way, it would probably, something great to do would probably be to open OBS and, run some AOM, you run an AOM recording or an SV, what is it, SVT, I think SVT recording. That will definitely put enough stress on your CPU while also not being so stressful that it downclocks. So or thermally throttles, right? Because obviously, well, if you set an all-core offset, the CPU theoretically should not throttle unless it hits 95C or whatever. So yeah, this is going to be a relatively heavy workload where it'll stay up at those high clocks, 5.7, 5.8 gigahertz, whatever you want to set. And you'll be able to you'll be able to check to see if your CPU is stable, or run something like GTA 5 enhanced. It'll give you a good ray tracing load, and GTA 5 enhanced, or it really even regular GTA 5 is pretty good. Well, I don't recommend running regular GTA 5 because now it's like it's not really a demanding enough game to fully utilize the GPU or even really the CPU. So I do recommend going with GTA 5 enhanced. It'll put a better load on your CPU. So, if that's stable, you're not noticing any crazy weirdness or obviously system crashes. Go back into BIOS, set it to 0.075 instead of 0.05. See, once again, boot back into Windows with that 0.075 offset and mess around. Do just do some general tasks, this and that. Once again, maybe start a little recording or go into GTA 5 Enhanced. See if that's stable. And if that is stable, great, go back and try 0.1. Now, most of the time, really, I don't recommend going any lower than 0.1. Just because at that point, you're already doing a very aggressive voltage offset, and you already lowered your risk of degradation so far that it's like, there's no need to go any lower. Going any lower on CPU voltage I mean, you can do it, right? Like if your CPU can do negative negative 0.125, then obviously that's better to run. If you want to keep going, you can. But all I'm saying is that if point 0.1 does work, there's no real reason for you to keep going after that. At that point, I wouldn't say you're wasting your time, but you're, it just you've already lowered your voltage by quite a bit. Um, so yeah, I mean, obviously, if it was me, I would keep going, right? If it was me, but for the general user, if you're tired of messing with it, this and that, a negative point 0.1 offset is perfectly fine, and you will never run into degradation issues ever, right? As long as even if you had an older BIOS with the older microcode, it's like if you set a negative point 0.1 offset, you've just lowered your chances of degradation by a lot, right? Like even on old bad microcode. Um, so yeah, at this point, now if you're only stable at negative point 0.5, 0.05, then you've still set a negative offset that you've well, if you're unstable at negative 0.05, you might want to test your CPU like to see if it has degraded already. And if it has degraded, um, if you're not hitting like clock speeds that a lot of people are saying, oh, this is how good my CPU is, and I'm able to run an um, all core overclock at 5.5 gigahertz, and you're only able to hit you know with the same voltage at like 5.1 or 5.2, your CPU might be degraded. And at that point, your best bet is to go ahead and RMA it. Um, Intel, once again, I've said this a couple of times. Intel, when I RMA'd my 1300K, it was the smoothest process I think I have ever like. It was amazing, right? They didn't even ask me for proof of purchase, which was great. Like, so if you do have an issue with your CPU, hopefully you have a laptop or something to hold you over while you're RMAing the CPU. But in general, just from my personal experience, it was amazing. Um, no complaints, no complaints. Every company should be like that. Every single company should be pro-consumer like that. And now I'm sure some of it is because of the whole degradation scare, right? Like they're probably like, okay, we need to make sure we take care of these people because you know, we messed up with this, right? Like we messed up. So and they're already trying to save face as it is. It would look really bad if they started turning away, degraded CPU RMAs. That's the last thing Intel wants right now is bad press. They'd rather take, however much the CPU costs them might be $200, right? They'd rather take that hit than potentially take an even bigger hit from big news outlets covering that. Um, and like pretty much dogging on them, where in that case they're going to probably lose hundreds of thousands of dollars because people are going to not buy their product. um Especially because AMD is very strong right now. Like Intel has to kind of be pro consumer for which is working, right? It was such a good experience. Now I'm like, I think a lot of people should go Intel, especially with the 270K plus that just came out. Even if you got a 280, I don't really recommend the 285K. It's more expensive, and the 270K plus is faster and less expensive. Like don't get the 285K unless you get it secondhand for very cheap, right? Like cheaper than a 270K plus. If you get a 285K for like 250, go right ahead. That's a great buy. But brand new, you can get a 270K plus with the same core count, same E-core count, like completely, basically same CPU, with like ring and everything like that, overclocked 1,000 megahertz compared to the 285K for a lower price. So it's kind of a no-brainer. Which is kind of a weird move from Intel. You'd think that they would lower the price of the 285K, but then it gets confusing because the naming scheme, the 285K is higher than 270K. But really, I don't really know why they didn't name the 270K like the 290K or something like that. Like it's a faster CPU than 285K out of the box. So them not naming it with a higher naming scheme is very weird. Because then they could lower the 290K to, or they could have the price of 290K at $300 and then have the 285K at 250, people would love, they would sell like hotcakes. Real quick before I end the video, let's go look at Micro Center, because I'm curious what the 285K actually costs right now. Let's see. Sorry for my voice. I've been talking a ton. Whoo, yikes, mother of pearl. Don't buy this. Oh my god. Holy shit. Do not buy that. Oh. 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 Oh my god. Holy shit, this makes me want to buy one. 259. Oh my god, that's wow. Wow. I'm going to make a dedicated video just talking about this real quick. Anyways, hopefully this was very informative, and you were able to lower your voltage, and yeah, and maybe overclock if you did that too. But yeah, hopefully this helped you out a little bit, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.